There are moments in life when the heart begins to sense a shift long before the mind can understand what is unfolding. A quiet stirring that seems to come from nowhere. A faint uneasiness that settles in the spirit without warning. A soft heaviness that does not arrive with noise or conflict, but still carries a weight that refuses to be ignored. Many call it intuition, others call it discernment. But those who walk in faith understand that this gentle stirring is often a form of early protection. A whisper from the Lord, a subtle guiding hand preparing the soul for what the eyes have not yet seen. In the life of a faithful woman, this stirring began long before anything appeared wrong on the surface. To the outside world, her marriage seemed stable. Her home looked peaceful, and her husband appeared devoted. But deep within her spirit, something felt different. Something felt unsettled in a way she could not explain. She began to notice small shifts, tiny changes in his tone, the growing irritation in his responses, the sudden distance in his eyes, the way conversations that once flowed easily now felt strained and hollow. She saw his laughter fade, not all at once, but gradually, as if the warmth behind it had disappeared. None of these moments were dramatic or obvious. They appeared like passing shadows, fleeting and almost unnoticeable, but her spirit registered each one with growing concern. Evenings became heavy with a silence that did not feel peaceful but cold, sharp and unnatural, the kind of silence that appears when someone's heart is already turning away. She tried to ignore it. She tried to pray through it. She tried to convince herself that she was imagining things, yet the heaviness persisted. She felt it during dinner when he avoided her eyes. She felt it when he became strangely protective of his phone. She felt it when he stayed out longer and explained less. She felt it when his affection became inconsistent, then rare, then absent. In moments of confusion, she asked gentle questions, hoping to understand what was happening, but his answers only deepened the ache. His words were short, his tone was cold, and his explanations lacked sincerity. Each time she tried to bring healing into the conversation, she felt herself being pushed further away. Still, she remained faithful. Still, she chose patience. Still, she believed the best. She prayed for peace, for clarity, for unity, even when she felt unseen, unheard, and unvalued. She carried her pain with grace, not because she was weak, but because her heart was strong enough to endure what she did not yet understand. What she did not know was that the Lord was watching everything that unfolded in silence. Nothing was hidden, nothing was overlooked, nothing was ignored. Every sigh, every tear, every sleepless night, every quiet prayer whispered in the dark was seen and known. Even before the betrayal formed in her husband's heart, even before his thoughts began to wander, even before the new supply entered the picture, the Lord saw the path he was choosing. The shift in his spirit did not happen overnight. It happened in stages, with small compromises, secret thoughts, quiet desires, and hidden dissatisfaction, the kind that grows slowly until it becomes a seed of rebellion. Although he hid these shifts from his wife, he could not hide them from heaven. Her spirit felt the consequences long before her mind could understand them, which is why the uneasiness grew, why her sleep became restless, why her confidence felt shaken. It was not because she was failing as a wife or lacking in love, but because the spiritual atmosphere of her home was changing and she could feel the storm before it arrived. Even as she sensed the darkness forming, she did not know that protection had already begun. She did not know that the Lord was already separating her spirit from the emotional damage that was coming. She did not know that every moment of discomfort was also a moment of preparation. She did not know that the heaviness she felt was not a sign of weakness, but a sign of divine awareness. There were days when she wondered if she was losing her peace, but in truth her peace was being preserved. There were nights when she wondered why her heart felt distant, but in truth her heart was being shielded. There were moments when she questioned her worth, but in truth her worth was being guarded from the lies forming against her. She could not see it yet, but the Lord was positioning her for revelation. He was preparing her to stand strong when the truth surfaced. He was strengthening her spirit so that deception would not break her. He was refining her discernment so she could recognize what was real and what was false. He was walking ahead of her into the battle she did not yet know was coming. While she carried her confusion with dignity, heaven was already working on her behalf. The spiritual shift she felt was not imagination, not a mistake, not anxiety, not insecurity. It was divine preparation, a sign that the Lord was close, a sign that nothing escaped his watch, a sign that she was seen, valued, and protected. This was the beginning of her awakening, not an awakening to fear, but to truth, not to heartbreak, but to deliverance, not to shame, but to restoration, because her spirit felt the change long before the evidence appeared. For the Lord always reveals the storm to the soul he intends to protect. There comes a time in every spiritual journey when protection begins long before danger becomes visible. And this was exactly what happened in the quiet life of this faithful woman. Even before betrayal had a name, even before disloyalty took form, even before a new supply existed in the shadows, the Lord had already stepped between her soul and the storm that was gathering around her. At first, she did not understand why she felt a growing heaviness in her chest, why her spirit felt unsettled without reason, why her nights became restless even though her days seemed normal. She noticed a strange tension in her home, a silent shift that she could not explain. Nothing dramatic was happening, yet something deep within her whispered that a change was coming. She carried on with patience, believing that perhaps she was simply tired or overthinking, yet the feeling persisted. What she did not realize was that this uneasiness was not confusion but divine protection, a quiet shield rising around her long before the attack ever reached her. Long before her husband spoke a careless word or made a reckless decision. Long before he drifted into emotional distance. Long before he entertained thoughts he should have resisted. The Lord saw everything forming inside him. Nothing escapes divine vision, not even the intentions a person tries to hide from themselves. The Lord saw the impatience building, the lack of gratitude, the quiet entitlement that was taking root, the dissatisfaction he refused to confront in a healthy way. He saw the moments when the husband began to feel drawn to flattery, to ego boosts, to emotional escapes outside the covenant he had made. These moments appeared small to the husband, insignificant even, but spiritually they were warning signs. And heaven responded long before the damage could fully unfold. The woman sensed it not in words but in her spirit. She felt an invisible pressure, a strange heaviness that would not leave her. She did not know it yet, but this heaviness was the Lord gently separating her emotions from the storm her husband was creating. It was protection disguised as discomfort. Had she felt totally at ease, she would have walked blindly into heartbreak, unable to brace herself for the pain that was coming. Instead, the Lord began strengthening her from within, quietly preparing her heart for truth that would one day surface. She would wake in the night feeling overwhelmed for reasons she could not explain. And while she thought it was fear, it was actually the Spirit of God guarding her. She would feel a sudden distance from her husband. And though she questioned herself, this distance was not rejection but protection. The Lord was softening the blow before it happened. He was loosening emotional ties that would otherwise destroy her completely. When she prayed for peace, he gave her resilience. When she prayed for clarity, he gave her discernment. When she prayed for her marriage, he gave her spiritual insight that allowed her to see what her eyes could not yet understand. The signs grew stronger. Her husband's excuses became thinner. His schedule became unpredictable. His kindness became inconsistent. She sensed something was off, not because she was suspicious, but because the spirit within her refused to be deceived. Still, she did not accuse him. Still, she did not fight him. Still, she did not act out of anger. Instead, she turned inward and sought the Lord, believing that whatever was happening would be revealed in its time. What she did not know was that, while she was praying for wisdom, the Lord was removing her from the line of spiritual fire. He allowed her to feel uneasy so she would begin to distance her heart from the man who was actively choosing selfishness. Every moment of confusion was a moment of grace. Every moment of discomfort was a layer of armor. Every moment of spiritual heaviness was a shield wrapping itself around her soul. Her husband, unaware of the seriousness of his actions, continued down a path that would eventually lead to devastation. He thought he was simply exploring attention, seeking excitement, feeding his ego. He did not realize he was planting seeds of destruction. He did not realize that what felt thrilling to him was spiritually toxic. He did not realize that his hidden choices were already affecting the atmosphere of his home. Meanwhile, the Lord was actively working to protect the woman from the consequences of actions she did not commit. He was guarding her peace long before it shattered. He was guarding her identity long before lies would try to attack it. He was guarding her purpose long before betrayal would try to dim it. The woman continued sensing something she could not explain, and in her quiet moments she felt a gentle pull toward prayer, reflection, and emotional stillness. This pull did not come from fear or insecurity. It came from divine orchestration. The Lord was pulling her closer so she would remain anchored when the ground beneath her shifted. The husband continued in secrecy, but he could not outrun divine awareness. While he tried to hide his wandering thoughts, the Lord was preparing to expose them. While he tried to mask his frustration and dissatisfaction, the Lord was preparing to reveal their root. And while he pursued distractions that temporarily inflated his ego, the Lord was preparing to break the very illusions he was chasing. The woman, meanwhile, was being strengthened without realizing it. Her spirit was learning to stand firm. Her mind was being prepared for clarity. Her emotions were being trained to detach from what would soon betray her. She was walking through a season of quiet spiritual separation, one that gently removed her from the harm that was rising inside her home. She would soon learn the truth. She would soon see what had been hidden. But before the breaking came the protection, the preparation, the spiritual shielding that ensured she would not collapse under the weight of what was coming. And this protection was proof that she was never alone. It was proof that heaven reacts before humans understand. It was proof that the Lord does not wait for destruction to strike before he intervenes. He moves early. He moves quietly. He moves with purpose. And he moved for her long before she knew she needed saving. The moment God begins revealing the true nature of the narcissistic husband marks a turning point so subtle yet profound that it often takes the wife some time to fully comprehend what is happening. Before this point, she may have felt confusion, anxiety, or a sense of heaviness that seemed to come from nowhere, yet these were early signals of divine intervention at work. A spiritual preparation so delicate and precise that it could not be perceived as overt interference. God moves quietly, forming a protective hedge around her spirit. not through visible force, but through subtle nudges of discernment that awaken her senses to truths previously masked by charm, manipulation, and deceit. She begins noticing details she once overlooked, the way his tone cuts deeper than before, the inconsistency between his words and actions, the small manipulations that reveal control rather than affection. Patterns that were once invisible to her eyes now emerge with startling clarity, revealing a life that has long been fractured under the weight of hidden intentions. God allows her to see these things, not to embitter her, not to create suspicion, for its own sake, but to protect her from deeper harm, to ensure that when the time comes for revelation, she will not be blindsided by betrayal she could have avoided had her spirit not been awakened. The subtle spiritual signals, restless nights, sudden urges to pray, unexplained emotions, a heightened awareness of moods and silences are not random. They are God's way of equipping her with insight, patience, and discernment, ensuring that she is not only aware but prepared to navigate the unfolding reality without losing her composure or her faith. As her husband continues to weave his lies, pursue his secret desires, or emotionally abandon her, she steps further into God's shelter, her heart fortified, her mind sharpened, her spirit sensitive to truth. This protection is not visible to anyone else. Friends, family, and even colleagues may still see her as vulnerable, yet behind the scenes, a divine hedge shields her from the full impact of what is being orchestrated against her. She may still feel emotional pain, disappointment, and confusion, yet these experiences are now tempered by the awareness that God is orchestrating a higher plan, turning what appears to be loss into preparation, turning deceit into revelation, and turning betrayal into awakening. It is in these early stages that the foundation of restoration begins to take shape, long before the narcissist realizes that his own strategies are being dismantled. God allows the husband to continue revealing himself, often in ways that he believes are secret or unnoticed, while simultaneously unveiling the truth to the wife in ways that are undeniable. She begins to recognize rehearsed kindness, empty apologies, public charm that masks private cruelty, and the subtle erosion of her dignity over time. The same behaviors she once excused or rationalized now stand as evidence of a consistent pattern of deception, and with each revelation, her clarity deepens. God's hand is evident in the way discernment arrives gradually, as if removing a veil from her eyes, allowing her to see clearly the motives, intentions, and character that have been hidden in plain sight. She perceives not just emotional or physical betrayals, but spiritual betrayals as well. The ways in which the narcissist attempted to shape her identity, her confidence, and her faith in ways that served his ego rather than their covenant. And as God opens her eyes to these truths, the narcissist begins to experience cracks in his own carefully constructed facade. His lies, once smooth and convincing, begin to stumble under the weight of divine exposure. His manipulations, once effective, begin to fail, and the very control he thought he wielded over situations and relationships starts to crumble. Behaviors that were once private now surface publicly. Contradictions emerge where previously there was consistency, and the image he projected to the world becomes increasingly difficult to maintain. God's intervention is precise. The husband is not struck down through dramatic or immediate consequences, but is allowed to walk into the outcomes of his own choices. As his strategies unravel, he begins to encounter the same discomfort, confusion, and betrayal he once imposed on his wife. The very structures he relied upon for power, admiration, and control begin to collapse, leaving him exposed to the reality of his own actions. Meanwhile, the wife continues to rise quietly, shielded by divine protection and guided by discernment. She learns to navigate the complexities of the situation with wisdom, recognizing patterns of manipulation, understanding the timing and impact of deceit, and responding in ways that preserve her peace and dignity. The protective hedge around her does not eliminate challenges or hardships. Rather, it equips her to face them with clarity, faith, and resilience. Each moment of revelation is accompanied by a strengthening of her spirit, a deepening of her confidence, and a refinement of her understanding of truth and justice. God's orchestration ensures that she is not merely surviving the betrayal, but growing through it, gaining insight, strength, and authority over her own life. As the narcissist's behaviors continue to surface, the wife witnesses firsthand the unraveling of the manipulative patterns that once controlled her life. Lies are exposed, inconsistencies multiply, charm loses its influence, and control diminishes. People around them, friends, family, colleagues begin to notice the disparity between his projected image and the reality of his actions. The more the husband tries to maintain his facade, the more transparent his true character becomes. In this unfolding drama, God demonstrates the precision of divine justice. The one who sought to harm and control is gradually stripped of influence, while the one who endured, prayed, and remained faithful is gradually elevated, protected, and prepared for restoration. Each subtle shift in awareness, each insight into character, each moment of clarity is part of a larger tapestry of divine intervention designed to ensure that the wife emerges not only intact, but strengthened, equipped, and vindicated. And as this process continues, the spiritual and emotional transformation becomes evident, revealing the depth of God's orchestration in turning betrayal into awakening, manipulation into exposure, and loss into preparation for restoration. The unraveling of the narcissist and the rising of the wife as the divine process unfolds. The narcissistic husband begins to unravel in ways that are both subtle and undeniable, revealing the full extent of his deception, manipulation, and emotional abandonment, while the wife steps into a season of clarity, discernment, and spiritual empowerment. God does not rush this process. Instead, he orchestrates events so that the husband's true character emerges naturally through his own choices, exposing the patterns of control and deceit he believed were hidden. The wife begins noticing behaviors that once confused her, the rehearsed kindness that hides indifference, the charm performed for public admiration rather than private affection, the inconsistencies in stories and promises that were never meant to be aligned with truth. These observations do not come all at once, but accumulate over time, each revelation acting like a brushstroke unveiling the complete picture of his betrayal. Simultaneously, God fortifies her spirit, equipping her with resilience, insight, and a growing sense of self-worth that had been eroded by years of emotional manipulation. The early spiritual signals sneeze feelings, dreams. Subtle impressions intensify into clear discernment, allowing her to see the duplicity and emptiness behind his words and actions. She begins recognizing the difference between genuine care and performance, the distinction between love and control, and the boundaries between her own truth and the illusions he constructs. As the husband continues to assert control, manipulate narratives, and attempt to justify his choices, he finds his power waning because divine exposure undermines every tactic he once used. Lies that were once convincing now stumble under scrutiny. Manipulations that once trapped her spirit now bounce harmlessly off the protective hedge God has built around her. The contrast becomes unmistakable. His influence diminishes while her awareness, peace, and authority expand. God's timing is perfect. He does not allow her to face these truths before she is ready to receive them with composure, understanding, and discernment. In this divine symmetry, the narcissist encounters the first tangible consequences of his actions: restlessness in his mind, instability in relationships, loss of trust from those he once impressed, and the erosion of the very structures of power he relied on for identity and control. Doors that once opened effortlessly close, opportunities once assumed become elusive, and people who once enabled his ego begin to distance themselves as clarity emerges. Meanwhile, the wife experiences the rising of her own life. Her spirit grows steadier, her intuition sharper, and her confidence restored. She begins to operate from a place of discernment rather than reaction, recognizing patterns and responding with calm authority. Her prayers, once silent and private, become the unseen engine of divine protection, and her faith transforms the chaos around her into preparation for restoration. Each revelation about the husband's deception is paired with spiritual growth for her, ensuring that she is not only surviving the betrayal, but growing stronger, wiser, and more attuned to God's purpose. The divine orchestration ensures that while the narcissist exposes himself through his own choices, the wife rises through her connection to God, experiencing vindication, peace, and spiritual fortification long before any external recognition occurs. People around them begin noticing the disparity between the two. The husband's manipulations falter, his charm fades, and the cracks in his facade become visible, while the wife carries herself with renewed dignity, calm authority, and an inner strength that commands respect. The process continues subtly, yet relentlessly. God's hand exposes falsehood, dismantles control, and elevates the faithful, demonstrating that divine justice does not always manifest through immediate punishment, but through precise, inevitable unraveling. In this unfolding story, the wife's life is being reconstructed in every dimension, spiritually, relationally, and even in reputation, while the narcissist experiences the erosion of the very structures he believed secured his advantage. Each moment of exposure, each slip in deceit, and each failure to maintain control is a direct consequence of God's orchestration, turning his own choices into instruments of his undoing. And as this continues, the wife's rising becomes unmistakable. She moves with confidence, her spirit anchored in truth, her presence radiating peace and authority, and her life increasingly aligned with God's restoration. The narcissist, meanwhile, grows increasingly frantic, confused, and powerless, trapped in the fallout of the very life he sought to control. The more he loses, the more she gains. The more he struggles, the more she walks forward with clarity, protection, and renewed dignity. And while the world may not yet fully recognize the divine orchestration at work, every event, every consequence, every shift in perception is meticulously directed by God to ensure that the faithful are vindicated and the deceitful are exposed. This is the stage where the unraveling of the narcissist and the rising of the wife intersect, a divine choreography of justice and restoration that is both precise and irreversible, demonstrating that the story of abandonment is never the story of defeat, but the beginning of God's restorative work. As the process initiated by God continues, the wife's life moves into a phase of profound restoration, one that touches every area previously marred by betrayal, manipulation, and spiritual suffocation. This restoration is not superficial, It is deep, holistic, and irreversible, carefully calibrated by divine wisdom to rebuild what was once shattered. She begins to notice changes in subtle ways. At first, an unexpected calm in her thoughts, clarity in decision-making that previously seemed impossible, a renewed sense of self-worth that does not depend on external validation. Every prayer she whispered in silence, every tear shed in secret, every act of faithfulness and endurance has been collected and honored by God, forming the foundation for this period of revival. Her emotional wounds start knitting together with precision. Places that felt broken begin to feel whole again, and spaces once clouded by doubt and fear are cleared by insight, discernment, and spiritual empowerment. The very areas where the narcissist exercised control, her confidence, her emotional stability, her voice in relationships, her sense of spiritual alignment are now strengthened as God restores the authority and dignity that were undermined for so long. Her financial life begins to shift in alignment with divine favor. Opportunities appear where there were none. Resources flow more steadily. Doors open that had previously seemed locked, and the weight of uncertainty and scarcity lifts from her shoulders. She experiences a restoration of relationships, too. People who once doubted her begin to see her clearly, recognizing the integrity, patience, and truth she maintained while others were deceived by the narcissist's facade. Friends, family, and colleagues who previously overlooked her suffering now begin to offer support, validation, and affirmation, not because she demanded it, but because God orchestrates recognition in His perfect timing. As this restoration progresses, the narcissistic husband faces an ever-deepening collapse. Unable to maintain control over his circumstances, his narratives, or the people who once reinforced his ego, his manipulations begin to fail publicly and privately. His charm that once swayed others now appears hollow, calculated, and transparent. He experiences relational rupture, losing allies, admirers, and enablers who once sustained his false sense of security, while simultaneously confronting financial instability, unforeseen obstacles, and mounting pressures that he cannot resolve through his typical tactics of deception or manipulation. The contrast between the wife and the husband becomes increasingly undeniable. She walks in authority, grace, and restored peace, while he stumbles through the unraveling of the very life he once believed was under his mastery. Spiritual clarity for the wife grows exponentially. She no longer questions her intuition, doubts her judgment, or allows manipulation to cloud her perception. The strategies the narcissist once relied upon, gaslighting, control, emotional coercion, and deceit, become powerless against the shield of God's restoration surrounding her. Every attempt to intimidate, manipulate, or destabilize her spirit is neutralized, not through her own strength, but through divine protection and the spiritual authority granted by God. She begins to experience joy and peace in places where she once felt pain and fear. Her home, her routines, her interactions, and even her self-reflection are no longer colored by anxiety, suspicion, or constant vigilance. Instead, she operates from a place of divine alignment, making decisions confidently, asserting boundaries firmly, and engaging with life fully restored to her by God. The narcissist, on the other hand, experiences the cascading effects of his choices. Doors he assumed would open now resist him, relationships crumble, influence diminishes, and his public and private persona loses credibility. He faces the consequences of abandoning covenant, and these consequences are not arbitrary. They are exact, precise, and unavoidable, orchestrated by divine authority. He confronts isolation, disappointment, and the loss of reputation and resources, realizing that the life he sought to control has collapsed, not because of human opposition, but because of God's measured and just intervention. In this period, divine justice reveals itself in the most profound ways. The wife's restoration is holistic, touching mind, spirit, body, relationships, finances, and social standing, while the narcissist faces the inescapable unraveling of every advantage he believed he commanded. The clarity, confidence, and authority she gains do not merely restore her to a previous state. They elevate her to a level of insight, discernment, and spiritual resilience far beyond what she possessed before. Her victories are quiet, profound, and lasting. Her peace cannot be disrupted by deceit or manipulation, and her dignity cannot be stolen again. God orchestrates scenarios where her worth is recognized publicly and privately, reinforcing the truth of her character and the falsity of the narcissist's claims. The very people who once believed the narcissist now witness his unraveling and are compelled to acknowledge her integrity, patience, and faithfulness. This serves as both vindication and a demonstration of divine justice in action, showing that God honors those who remain steadfast in faith, integrity, and perseverance, even under prolonged abuse and manipulation. Meanwhile, the narcissist faces a daily reality that mirrors the pain, confusion, and betrayal he once imposed on the wife. His experiences are calibrated to teach, correct, and humble him. Emotional instability, relational breakdowns, financial strain, loss of influence, and public exposure combine to create a mirror that reflects his past actions and the consequences they incurred. Each day he experiences small but cumulative losses and frustrations that chip away at his pride, forcing confrontation with the truth he long ignored. In parallel, the wife's life continues to ascend. Her spiritual, emotional, and relational restoration enables her to engage the world with a new sense of authority, grounded not in manipulation or control, but in divine alignment and truth. She walks through her community, home, and professional life with confidence, her spirit marked by peace, clarity, and a deep understanding that her endurance and faithfulness have produced fruit that cannot be taken away. Opportunities that once seemed inaccessible now present themselves. Financial blessings flow in alignment with God's provision, and relationships flourish under her renewed insight, discernment, and wisdom. Every element of her restoration serves as a testimony of God's sovereignty and justice. He honors faithfulness, exposes deceit, and restores what was lost with precision, care, and divine timing. The wife's transformation is not a reaction to the narcissist's collapse, but a proactive rebuilding orchestrated by God. It ensures she is prepared for every challenge, protected from every lingering influence, and elevated in ways that reflect her true value as a faithful and enduring vessel. Her peace, dignity, and restored honor become evident to all who observe, leaving no room for the distortions or lies the narcissist once relied upon. Meanwhile, the narcissist, confronted by the cumulative consequences of his own choices, begins to understand that every attempt to control, manipulate, or dominate was ultimately futile against the authority of God's justice. He experiences humiliation, frustration, and the destabilization of his constructed life, all while the wife enjoys the fruits of restoration, vindication, and divine protection. And in this interplay, the contrast is stark. The one who abandoned covenant suffers the unraveling of his plans, while the one who endured with faith rises in alignment with God's promises, witnessing firsthand that true justice, restoration, and honor come from divine orchestration, not human intervention. The next phase unfolds as God moves decisively to expose every facet of the narcissistic husband's character, actions, and hidden motives, ensuring that nothing remains concealed behind charm, deception, or carefully constructed illusions. The exposure is thorough, meticulous, and perfectly timed, revealing the patterns of betrayal, manipulation, and emotional abuse in ways that cannot be denied, dismissed, or minimized. This divine unveiling begins subtly, with inconsistencies in his stories becoming glaringly obvious to those around him. The carefully cultivated image of confidence and control starts to falter, and behaviors once hidden behind private interactions emerge in public, leaving witnesses puzzled, concerned, and increasingly aware of the truth. God orchestrates situations where his lies contradict observable realities, where his manipulations fail to produce the results he expects, and where his charm, once irresistible, loses its effectiveness under the scrutiny of revealed truth. The narcissist's new relationships, previously thought to be untouchable, become mirrors reflecting the very behaviors he thought were concealed, showing others the controlling tendencies, contempt, and self-centeredness that had been invisible in his former marriage. Each encounter, each revelation, and each contradiction chips away at the carefully constructed narrative of superiority he has maintained, exposing him not just to the wife, but to the entire social, familial, and professional circles he once dominated. As the truth unfolds, the wife witnesses the full extent of his deception, not from rumors or speculation, but through direct divine orchestration that allows her to see patterns, motives, and consequences clearly. The exposure is both protective and corrective. It shields her from future harm, while simultaneously ensuring that the narcissist confronts the reality of his actions in ways he cannot manipulate, evade, or reinterpret. The divine intervention is surgical, removing the ability to obscure, charm, or mislead, while simultaneously revealing the depth of his abandonment and betrayal to himself. He becomes increasingly aware that every manipulation, every lie, every act of betrayal is visible to God and to those who matter, and that no performance can hide the truth. As he experiences mounting frustration, isolation, and the collapse of relationships, the narcissist begins to encounter mirrored consequences on a deeper level. God allows him to feel the emotional weight of what he inflicted. He experiences rejection, misunderstanding, and disconnection, experiencing firsthand the spiritual and emotional isolation his wife endured for years. The mirrored reality forces him to confront the long-term impact of his choices, showing him the destruction of trust, the devastation of intimacy, and the profound damage caused by his self-centered actions. Every instance of control he exercised now becomes a point of reflection, and every attempt to regain dominance meets resistance, exposing the emptiness of his efforts. Meanwhile, the wife continues ascending, her life infused with clarity, peace, and spiritual empowerment that allows her to act decisively and compassionately without fear or manipulation. Her intuition, sharpened by divine guidance, prevents deception from taking root, ensuring that her restored life is both protected and productive. Opportunities, resources, and relationships align with divine purpose, demonstrating that God honors faithfulness and vindicates those who endure with patience and integrity. This contrast between the wife's rise and the narcissist's unraveling becomes increasingly pronounced as divine justice operates seamlessly. Her dignity, honor, and influence grow while his power, control, and influence diminish. The social, emotional, and spiritual dynamics of their worlds shift, with witnesses and communities recognizing the integrity, endurance, and righteousness of the wife, while simultaneously observing the unraveling, exposure, and humiliation of the narcissist. At this stage, the narcissist faces an undeniable reality. The world sees his truth as God reveals it, and he can no longer rely on manipulation, charm, or deception to control perceptions. His authority collapses because it was never aligned with righteousness, covenant, or divine protection. It depended solely on human fear, ignorance, and compliance. God ensures that every tactic he once used to dominate, control, or manipulate is rendered powerless, and the consequences of his abandonment and betrayal materialize fully. He experiences not only relational and social repercussions, but internal reckoning, confusion, regret, and helplessness confront him at every turn, reinforcing the lesson that abandoning covenant and violating integrity carries inevitable consequences. The divine exposure also functions as a public witness to the consequences of betrayal. Those who may have supported, enabled, or remained silent are confronted with undeniable evidence of his actions, shaping their perceptions and decisions regarding accountability, support, and justice. This exposure is precise and calibrated, ensuring that every aspect of the narcissist's pattern is revealed without unnecessary humiliation to the innocent wife, but with absolute accountability for the guilty. The weight of divine exposure transforms the narcissist's world into one where his every action, intention, and motive is visible and accountable, eroding his confidence, dismantling false narratives, and confronting him with the truth he long ignored. In the midst of this unraveling, the wife experiences continued vindication, not as a product of human approval, but as the natural result of divine justice, truth, and protection. She witnesses the consequences of betrayal unfold without having to intervene directly, observing the alignment of her life, resources, and relationships with God's restoration, while the narcissist's influence collapses entirely. This phase is not just punitive, it is corrective, restorative, and educational for both parties. The narcissist faces the full scope of accountability, and the wife experiences unassailable vindication, spiritual empowerment, and restored authority in her life. Her restored confidence and clarity allow her to operate from a place of security, wisdom, and divine alignment, ensuring that she cannot be manipulated or diminished again. God's justice, revealed through exposure and accountability, demonstrates that no covenant breaking, no manipulation, and no spiritual abuse can escape divine awareness, and that every faithful act, every prayer, and every instance of enduring integrity is honored and amplified. The narrative reaches a stage where the wife walks in freedom, peace, and spiritual authority, fully restored and vindicated, while the narcissist faces the comprehensive collapse of his illusions, control, and influence, forced to confront the magnitude of his betrayal in the presence of truth, consequences, and divine exposure. There comes a time in every spiritual journey when protection begins long before danger becomes visible. And this was exactly what happened in the quiet life of this faithful woman. Even before betrayal had a name, even before disloyalty took form, even before a new supply existed in the shadows, the Lord had already stepped between her soul and the storm that was gathering around her. At first, she did not understand why she felt a growing heaviness in her chest, why her spirit felt unsettled without reason, why her nights became restless even though her days seemed normal. She noticed a strange tension in her home, a silent shift that she could not explain. Nothing dramatic was happening, yet something deep within her whispered that a change was coming. She carried on with patience, believing that perhaps she was simply tired or overthinking, yet the feeling persisted. What she did not realize was that this uneasiness was not confusion but divine protection, a quiet shield rising around her long before the attack ever reached her. Long before her husband spoke a careless word or made a reckless decision. Long before he drifted into emotional distance. Long before he entertained thoughts he should have resisted. The Lord saw everything forming inside him. Nothing escapes divine vision, not even the intentions a person tries to hide from themselves. The Lord saw the impatience building, the lack of gratitude, the quiet entitlement that was taking root, the dissatisfaction he refused to confront in a healthy way. He saw the moments when the husband began to feel drawn to flattery, to ego boosts, to emotional escapes outside the covenant he had made. These moments appeared small to the husband, insignificant even, but spiritually they were warning signs. And heaven responded long before the damage could fully unfold. The woman sensed it not in words but in her spirit. She felt an invisible pressure, a strange heaviness that would not leave her. She did not know it yet, but this heaviness was the Lord gently separating her emotions from the storm her husband was creating. It was protection disguised as discomfort. Had she felt totally at ease, she would have walked blindly into heartbreak, unable to brace herself for the pain that was coming. Instead, the Lord began strengthening her from within, quietly preparing her heart for truth that would one day surface. She would wake in the night feeling overwhelmed for reasons she could not explain. And while she thought it was fear, it was actually the Spirit of God guarding her. She would feel a sudden distance from her husband. And though she questioned herself, this distance was not rejection but protection. The Lord was softening the blow before it happened. He was loosening emotional ties that would otherwise destroy her completely. When she prayed for peace, He gave her resilience. When she prayed for clarity, He gave her discernment. When she prayed for her marriage, He gave her spiritual insight that allowed her to see what her eyes could not yet understand. The signs grew stronger. Her husband's excuses became thinner. His schedule became unpredictable. His kindness became inconsistent. She sensed something was off, not because she was suspicious, but because the spirit within her refused to be deceived. Still, she did not accuse him. Still, she did not fight him. Still, she did not act out of anger. Instead, she turned inward and sought the Lord, believing that whatever was happening would be revealed in its time. What she did not know was that, while she was praying for wisdom, the Lord was removing her from the line of spiritual fire. He allowed her to feel uneasy so she would begin to distance her heart from the man who was actively choosing selfishness. Every moment of confusion was a moment of grace. Every moment of discomfort was a layer of armor. Every moment of spiritual heaviness was a shield wrapping itself around her soul. Her husband, unaware of the seriousness of his actions, continued down a path that would eventually lead to devastation. He thought he was simply exploring attention, seeking excitement, feeding his ego. He did not realize he was planting seeds of destruction. He did not realize that what felt thrilling to him was spiritually toxic. He did not realize that his hidden choices were already affecting the atmosphere of his home. Meanwhile, the Lord was actively working to protect the woman from the consequences of actions she did not commit. He was guarding her peace long before it shattered. He was guarding her identity long before lies would try to attack it. He was guarding her purpose long before betrayal would try to dim it. The woman continued sensing something she could not explain, and in her quiet moments she felt a gentle pull toward prayer, reflection, and emotional stillness. This pull did not come from fear or insecurity. It came from divine orchestration. The Lord was pulling her closer so she would remain anchored when the ground beneath her shifted. The husband continued in secrecy, but he could not outrun divine awareness. While he tried to hide his wandering thoughts, the Lord was preparing to expose them. While he tried to mask his frustration and dissatisfaction, the Lord was preparing to reveal their root. And while he pursued distractions that temporarily inflated his ego, the Lord was preparing to break the very illusions he was chasing. The woman, meanwhile, was being strengthened without realizing it. Her spirit was learning to stand firm. Her mind was being prepared for clarity. Her emotions were being trained to detach from what would soon betray her. She was walking through a season of quiet spiritual separation, one that gently removed her from the harm that was rising inside her home. She would soon learn the truth. She would soon see what had been hidden. But before the breaking came the protection, the preparation, the spiritual shielding that ensured she would not collapse under the weight of what was coming. And this protection was proof that she was never alone. It was proof that heaven reacts before humans understand. It was proof that the Lord does not wait for destruction to strike before he intervenes. He moves early. He moves quietly. He moves with purpose. And he moved for her long before she knew she needed saving. The final section of this divine narrative focuses on the comprehensive restoration and vindication of the faithful wife, a process that is both internal and external, spiritual and practical, visible and deeply personal. After years of emotional erosion, spiritual suffocation, and betrayal, she experiences a profound shift in every aspect of her life, a shift orchestrated by God with precision, timing, and a fullness that human understanding cannot anticipate. Her spirit, once weary and burdened, now rises in strength, clarity, and resilience. She moves through life with a calm authority that radiates from her very presence, not as a result of personal striving, but because of divine empowerment. Every area of her life begins to reflect restoration. Her emotional health, her spiritual discernment, her relational boundaries, and her sense of self-worth are all fortified in ways that make her immune to manipulation, guilt, or fear. The peace she experiences is not fragile or circumstantial. It is deep, abiding, and unshakable, flowing from the recognition that God has honored her faithfulness, prayers, and endurance. As she walks forward, she notices subtle shifts in her environment. Opportunities she thought were lost return in unexpected forms. Resources are made available, relationships become supportive and affirming, and doors that were once closed now open seamlessly, illustrating the principle that divine restoration often surpasses human expectation. Her reputation, once tarnished by the lies, manipulations, and public deceptions of the narcissist, is fully restored. Those who previously misjudged or dismissed her begin to see her in the light of truth, acknowledging her integrity, resilience, and patience. Family members, friends, colleagues, and even casual acquaintances recognize the contrast between her steadfastness and the narcissist's unraveling, further validating her lived experience and confirming the divine orchestration behind her vindication. God does not merely restore what was lost. He amplifies it, creating opportunities, favor, and influence that exceed what she had before, demonstrating that faithfulness is never in vain and that enduring integrity attracts blessings far greater than what deception or betrayal can ever offer. In tandem, the narcissist's life continues to unravel, exposing the full consequences of his abandonment and deceit. Relationships falter, opportunities diminish, credibility erodes, and the internal peace he once took for granted disappears entirely. Every aspect of the life he believed was a triumph becomes a mirror of accountability, forcing him to confront the magnitude of the betrayal he inflicted and the reality of his moral and spiritual isolation. Meanwhile, the wife, now strengthened and fully protected under God's covering, operates from a place of wisdom, discernment, and empowerment. She no longer fears manipulation or intimidation, no longer carries unjust guilt, and no longer doubts her intuition or spiritual insight. The spiritual chains once wielded against her are broken, and she experiences a newfound freedom that allows her to engage with the world confidently and with purpose, without being weighed down by the past. Socially and professionally, she encounters doors opening, relationships deepening, and opportunities aligning in ways that affirm the righteousness of her endurance. Her influence becomes a testimony, not only of her personal resilience, but of God's faithfulness and justice. Every blessing, every victory, and every restored element of her life is a visible and undeniable testament to the truth that God honors those who remain faithful, even in the face of profound betrayal. The narcissist, by contrast, experiences the cumulative impact of every lie, manipulation, and act of abandonment. His control evaporates, his influence diminishes, and his perceived superiority crumbles before the weight of divine justice. The world begins to see the contrast between his fractured life and the wife's restored, flourishing existence. Witnesses cannot ignore the alignment of her life with truth, protection, and divine favor, while his unraveling becomes undeniable proof of accountability. This final stage emphasizes not only restoration, but empowerment. The wife now carries an authority and confidence rooted in God's intervention, making her capable of discerning future threats, protecting her heart and boundaries, and walking forward without fear or hesitation. Spiritually, emotionally, socially, and practically, she is renewed, whole, and recognized, demonstrating that enduring faithfulness, prayer, and integrity are never wasted, even when human systems fail to see or validate the struggle. God's timing, precision, and omnipotence ensure that the reversal of fortunes is complete. The narcissist's illusions and influence collapse, while the faithful wife's life ascends into blessing, favor, and honor. The restoration extends beyond mere compensation. It reshapes her destiny, aligns her environment, and secures her legacy, demonstrating that divine intervention is meticulous, just, and deeply personal. Every prayer, tear, and act of perseverance she invested now bears fruit beyond measure, producing a life filled with clarity, peace, prosperity, and spiritual authority. The contrast is undeniable. Where the narcissist experienced unraveling, exposure, and isolation, she experiences vindication, opportunity, and divine favor. Where he walks in confusion and collapse, she walks in discernment, restoration, and unstoppable momentum. God's justice, in this narrative, is not delayed, arbitrary, or partial. It is comprehensive, precise, and perfectly executed, ensuring that the faithful are protected, honored, and elevated. While covenant-breaking betrayal meets the exact consequence it deserves, the ultimate lesson is clear. Faithfulness, integrity, and prayer are powerful shields. Abandonment, manipulation, and betrayal carry inescapable consequences, and God's sovereignty ensures that truth, justice, and restoration prevail. This final section concludes with the undeniable reality that the wife, once abandoned and wounded, now walks fully restored, protected, and honored, her life a testament to divine intervention. while the narcissistic husband faces the full weight of his choices, exposed, humbled, and accountable.